and it was kind of surprising because it's been quiet for the last week or so in terms of actual activity at Nancy's house. And all of a sudden, several black tinted out windows SUVs showed up. And then a group of people got out. Some were federal agents, I am told, and we have learned just tonight that others were prosecutors, which is interesting. Prosecutors from Pima County wanted to tour the house, and you could tell they looked different than the law enforcement that we've seen. They were, dressed up in suits. And they walked around the front of the house. They walked around the back of the house. That video you're showing there, though, that's interesting. I don't know if we can replay that because that's actually what stood out to me the most. One of the black SUVs, most of them parked in the front. The prosecutors got out. The law enforcement got out. But there was one SUV, Jesse, that actually pulled around the side. That one had very tinted windows. We couldn't see who was inside. They opened the garage, pulled into the garage, and then they closed the garage before, and that's it right there. You're going to see it pull around the side and then into the garage. Then they closed the garage before we could see who got out of it. Stayed for about an hour. Then the garage opened back up, and that SUV pulled out, and they kind of like zoomed down.
The Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, are defined by a jagged, prehistoric beauty. Here, the saguaro cacti stand like sentinels against a sky that, at twilight, turns the color of a deepening bruise. It is a landscape of quiet wealth, where the desert's vastness offers a luxury of isolation. But on the night of January 31, 2026, that very isolation was transformed into a weapon. Inside a home designed to be a fortress of peace, 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie was winding down her evening, moving through the familiar rhythms of a life well lived. She was a woman of steady habits, a lover of family board games, and a person whose physical existence was tethered to the rhythmic, electronic pulse of a medical pacemaker. She had no way of knowing that, from the shadows of the brush, she was being watched with clinical, predatory intent. The nightmare began not with a scream, but with a digital death. At precisely 1:47 a.m., the home's Nest security system, the electronic eyes meant to guard Nancy's sanctuary, was abruptly severed. The feed went black, plunging the property into a deliberate, artificial void. For 41 minutes, Nancy Guthrie existed in a terrifying darkness, a gap in time where no cameras reached and no witnesses stood. The only record of her existence was the silent ticking of the device inside her chest. Then, at 2:28 a.m., the final signal arrived. Nancy's pacemaker synced with its external monitor for the last time. After that, there was only the wind whistling through the canyons and a silence that would soon haunt the entire nation. When the sun rose over the desert the following morning, the world woke up to a mystery that felt like a fracture in reality. Nancy wasn't just a missing grandmother. She was the mother of NBC's Savannah Guthrie, a woman whose face was a staple in millions of American homes. The search that followed was a frantic, scorched-earth effort, a desperate scramble across the sun-bleached rock and dust of the Arizona wilderness. But as days bled into weeks, the physical trail didn't just grow cold, it seemed to evaporate. The desert, it appeared, had swallowed Nancy Guthrie whole, leaving behind nothing but a series of unanswered questions and a growing sense of dread. That was until April 2026, when the narrative didn't just shift, it shattered. Brian Entin, a senior national correspondent for News Nation who had been embedded in Tucson since the early days, broke a story that would send a seismic shock through the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Sitting down with a high-level anonymous insider, Entin revealed a bombshell that reframed the entire disappearance. The search for Nancy Guthrie hadn't just been difficult, it had been compromised from its very inception by the people sworn to lead it. According to Entin's whistleblower, the supervisor placed in charge on February 1, the most critical day of the investigation, had allegedly never led a homicide or a major kidnapping case in their entire career. This wasn't a minor administrative oversight. It was a fundamental failure of perspective. Because of this lack of experience, the Guthrie residence wasn't treated as a crime scene where every microscopic fiber or stray drop of DNA could be the key to a cage. Instead, it was handled with the mindset of a search and rescue. Investigators operated under the tragic assumption that Nancy had simply wandered off, a silver alert case of an elderly woman lost in the brush. As first responders moved through the house, they weren't looking for a predator's footprints. They were looking for a grandmother who might be hiding in a closet or confused in the yard. In their haste, they may have inadvertently trampled the very evidence needed to catch a monster. The stranger DNA that detectives are now desperately trying to isolate in high-tech labs was likely contaminated or destroyed in those critical first 48 hours. While the digital ghost left behind by the pacemaker provided a surgical timeline of the crime, the physical response was clumsy and archaic. As the investigation deepens into the dark details of the predatory profile and the digital ransom demands, one question looms over the desert. Was Nancy's disappearance a failure of police procedure, or was the kidnapper simply too calculated to be caught? Before we descend further into this chilling timeline, ensure you are part of our community. If you find this investigation into the Guthrie case as gripping as we do, please like this video and subscribe to True Crime Threads. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on the stories that demand justice. What do you think? Did the initial search and rescue mentality cost Nancy her life? Let us know in the comments below. By mid-April, the investigation underwent a chilling transformation, shifting from a frantic search for a missing person to a deep dive into the mind of a hunter. Brian Entin's relentless reporting brought a specific, haunting piece of evidence to the forefront of the national consciousness: the Ozark Trail hiker pack. In the graininess of the recovered doorbell footage, the figure moving toward Nancy's home was more than just a shadow. To forensic profilers at the FBI, every movement told a story of preparation. They began to analyze the specific way the pack sat on the intruder's shoulders, the tension in the straps, the lack of sway. The assessment was sobering. Based on the weight distribution, experts believe the bag didn't just contain a change of clothes. It was likely heavy with the tools of a professional: restraints, medical suppression equipment, or the very devices used to bypass the home's digital security. Entin described this level of premeditation as terrifyingly clinical. This was not a crime of opportunity. It was a targeted surgical strike. As the physical profile of the suspect sharpened, a new, more chaotic front opened in the digital world, descending into what has been described as cryptographic psychological warfare. Following Entin's reports, it was confirmed that the FBI had begun tracking a series of Bitcoin ransom demands. In early April 2026, messages surfaced demanding roughly $70,000 in cryptocurrency. On the surface, it seemed like a standard kidnapping for profit, but the details buried within the notes were what truly unnerved the Guthrie family. The sender referenced specific details about the internal layout of Nancy's home, private information that had never been released to the press. Entin's investigation into these notes highlighted a disturbing paradox. Why would a kidnapper demand a relatively small sum of $70,000 in volatile Bitcoin when the family had already publicly guaranteed a $1 million reward for her safe return? It suggested a perpetrator who was taunting law enforcement, using the blockchain not just for currency, but as a stage. They were operating in the off-ramps of the digital world, masking their location through servers in Eastern Europe and South America, effectively becoming a ghost in the machine. The tension escalated when the messages took a darker turn. The demands shifted from ransom to a macabre trade. The location of Nancy's remains in exchange for half a Bitcoin. This pivot led investigators to a haunting theory. Given Nancy's age and her dependence on a pacemaker, the abductor may have fundamentally miscalculated the physical toll of the crime. The trauma of the abduction, the forced movement into the desert night, and the absence of her daily medication may have triggered a catastrophic medical event within hours. If Nancy suffered a cardiac crisis early in the kidnapping, the perpetrator's leverage vanished in an instant. The erratic nature of the recent messages, sometimes claiming she is alive in Sonora, Mexico, other times offering the location of a body, suggests a criminal cell in a state of panic, or perhaps digital vultures circling a tragedy they helped create. As Brian and Tin pressed for answers on the Sonora connection, questioning the delay in coordinating with Mexican authorities, a rift widened. The desert is a place of secrets, but it had become a race between the speed of digital forensic genealogy and the physical endurance of a woman whose only witness was a silent heart monitor. As the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance crossed the 70-day mark, the air in Tucson grew thick with a sense of structural tension. The physical search of the Arizona desert, once a chaotic swarm of drones and K-9 units, had largely gone silent. But behind the closed doors of high-tech laboratories and the buzzing offices of federal investigators, a new kind of battle was being waged. Brian Entin's relentless pursuit of the truth brought to light a heartbreaking reality. Nancy's own body may have been the most reliable witness to her final moments. The theory was as simple as it was tragic. The abductors, for all their clinical precision with doorbell cameras and digital bypasses, likely made one fatal miscalculation: the extreme fragility of an 84-year-old woman. Nancy didn't just have a pacemaker, she was tethered to it. It was a device that not only kept her heart beating but recorded every surge of adrenaline and every moment of distress. When the pacemaker app on her phone disconnected at 2:28 a.m. on that fateful night, it wasn't just a technical glitch. It was a signal that Nancy was being moved away from her life, away from her safety, and away from her essential medication. If she suffered a cardiac event during the trauma of the kidnapping, the perpetrators' leverage died with her. This would explain why the ransom demands became so erratic, shifting from high-stakes Bitcoin requests to desperate, contradictory taunts about the location of her remains. But while the kidnappers may have outrun the immediate search, they could not outrun their own biology. Entin recently sat down with world-renowned genetic genealogists to discuss the silver bullet of this case: DNA deconvolution. Inside the Guthrie home, investigators found what they call a mixed sample, a complex overlapping of genetic material from multiple people on a single surface, likely a doorknob or a propped-open door. Because Nancy's home was a family hub, traditional testing couldn't immediately separate the stranger DNA from the family's own markers. However, the technology is catching up. Forensic scientists are now using advanced software to digitally unmix these profiles, pulling a clean, predatory string of code from the chaos. This biological ghost is the only thing that can give a name to the masked figure in the hiker pack. It is a race against time, as the Pima County Sheriff's Department faces internal turmoil and a no-confidence vote, leaving the public to wonder if the breakthrough will come from a laboratory bench before the trail vanishes forever into the shifting desert sands. As the calendar turned toward the midpoint of April 2026, the investigation hit a wall of jurisdictional friction and geographic mystery. Brian and Tin's reporting shifted focus toward the Sonora connection, a lead that suggested Nancy Guthrie may have been taken across the international boundary into Mexico. Entin recently broke news regarding a specific, dark-colored SUV seen crossing the border into Nogales just hours after Nancy's pacemaker sent its final sync. While the Pima County Sheriff's Department was initially focused on the rugged terrain of the Catalina foothills, the Guthrie family's private security team was already looking south. This created a visible rift. Savannah Guthrie has reportedly been pushing for a more aggressive, federal-led pursuit of this lead, questioning why it took local authorities nearly 2 months to establish deep coordination with Mexican officials. The trail in Mexico is as much digital as it is physical. Entin's sources revealed that digital pings from burner phones used to send the erratic Bitcoin ransom notes have been routed through servers in South America and Eastern Europe, but the physical origin of several anonymous letters points directly to Sonora. These letters claim Nancy was seen alive in small border towns like Rio Rico. However, the reliability of these claims is haunted by the digital vultures Entin warned about, opportunists who may be using the border as a shield to taunt a grieving family. The tension reached a boiling point when Entin challenged the narrative of the Immaculate Home. He raised pointed questions about the propped open back doors and whether the house had been surveyed by a highly organized criminal cell in the weeks leading up to the Winter Olympics, a time when the family's schedule was public knowledge. Entin's persistence has forced a level of transparency from the sheriff's department that many believe wouldn't exist otherwise. As the search passes day 70, the investigation sits in a tense waiting game. Between the FBI's blockchain analysis and Entin's on-the-ground pursuit of the Walmart leads, the abductor is being squeezed. Yet, as Entin has noted, the most harrowing piece of evidence remains the silence of the heart monitor. It is a race between the speed of digital forensic genealogy and the physical endurance of an 84-year-old woman who was taken into the desert night with nothing but her medical device to mark her final known location. The procedural turmoil of the early search eventually curdled into a full-scale crisis of confidence within the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Brian Entin's reporting exposed what many are now calling the homicide gap, a fundamental failure in the chain of command that occurred the moment Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. The revelation that the lead supervisor on day one had allegedly never spearheaded a kidnapping or homicide investigation became a central pillar of the public's frustration. This lack of experience didn't just affect morale, it dictated the physical reality of the case. While the digital footprint was being analyzed by federal agents, the physical crime scene was being treated as a search and rescue mission. This initial rush to judgment meant that critical markers, like the trail of blood droplets discovered at the doorstep, were not processed with the clinical intensity they required. In a case where every second counts, the first 48 hours were marred by an assumption that Nancy had simply wandered off, rather than being taken. Amidst this procedural turmoil, the scientific search continues in the silence of the laboratory. The stranger DNA, recovered from the Guthrie home, remains the most promising lead, yet it is currently trapped in a mixed sample. DNA expert C.C. Moore has clarified that this isn't a simple case of waiting for a match in a database. Investigators are using cutting-edge DNA deconvolution software, a digital unmixing process designed to isolate the suspect's genetic code from the family's own biological traces. This clean string of DNA is now viewed as the silver bullet, the only thing capable of identifying the figure in the Walmart hiker pack. The emotional stakes were heightened when Brian Entin shared his own personal connection to the tragedy. After spending weeks in Tucson, Entin admitted he went home and installed security cameras for his own mother, haunted by the realization of how easily a sanctuary can be breached. He is now pushing for a formal interview with Savannah Guthrie, who returned to the Today Show desk on April 6, hoping to ask the granular, forensic questions that have yet to be answered. Questions about the propped open back doors and the exact nature of the private security that may have been bypassed. As the $1 million reward remains untouched, the community stands at a crossroads. The search for Nancy Guthrie has become a race between the slow, deliberate march of forensic genealogy and the fatting signal of a heart monitor. Whether the truth is found in the DNA labs of the FBI or through a whistleblower in the sheriff's department, the world is waiting for the moment the digital ghost of Nancy Guthrie finally finds its way home. The investigative failures of the first 48 hours did not just remain a topic for news broadcasts. They eventually curdled into a full-scale political and legal rebellion in Pima County. By late April 2026, the procedural rush to judgment, exposed by Brian Entin's whistleblowers, had moved from the airwaves to the chambers of government. The Pima County Board of Supervisors, faced with an increasingly outraged public, issued a staggering ultimatum to Sheriff Chris Nanos. The focus was no longer just on the man in the hiker pack, but on the leadership that allowed the trail to go cold. Internal documents and testimonies began to paint a picture of a department in turmoil. A no-confidence vote was initiated by the deputies themselves, a rare and stinging indictment of the sheriff's handling of the Guthrie case. The rank-and-file officers, many of whom had spent weeks scouring the desert floor, felt betrayed by a leadership that had allegedly assigned an inexperienced supervisor to a case of national significance. As this internal battle raged, the legal aftermath began to take shape even without a suspect in custody. Civil attorneys began the process of forensic preservation of the department's communication logs. They wanted to know exactly when the decision was made to treat the scene as a silver alert instead of a kidnapping. This wasn't just about accountability. It was about ensuring that the digital ghost of the case, the Nest logs, the pacemaker data, and the forensic software results, wouldn't be buried by bureaucratic face-saving. The community reaction was a mixture of grief and fury. In the Catalina foothills, the quiet isolation that residents once paid a premium for now felt like a vulnerability. Neighborhood watch groups, once informal, became militarized with high-end surveillance, a direct response to the predatory profile Entin had helped reveal. The $1 million reward remained a haunting figure on digital billboards across the state, a reminder that while the department was fighting itself, the perpetrator remained free, perhaps still watching the very news reports that analyzed his every move. This chapter of the Guthrie saga became a battle for the soul of the investigation. The Mexico connection and the Bitcoin ransom were the symptoms, but the homicide gap was the disease. As the sheriff's department faced its ultimatum, the national public looked toward a federal-led approach, hoping that a fresh pair of eyes and a more clinical mindset could salvage what was lost in those first 48 hours. The search for Nancy Guthrie had evolved into a search for justice, not just for a missing woman, but for a system that had failed its most vulnerable citizen. For those close to Nancy, this silent period has become the most excruciating phase of the ordeal. There are no more digital pings, no more high-speed chases through the brush, only the agonizing weight of $1 million reward that remains unclaimed. The emotional toll on the Guthrie family has moved from a private tragedy to a matter of national empathy. Savannah Guthrie, having spent over 2 months living what she described as a living hell, finally reached a breaking point of sheer exhaustion. She had traveled from the Winter Olympics in Italy to the rugged canyons of Arizona, and then into the quiet, empty rooms of her mother's home, searching for a sign that never came. In a move that surprised many, Savannah returned to the Today Show desk on April 6, 2026. Her return was not a sign that the search had ended, but a desperate grab for normalcy in a life that had been dismantled by a predator. Insiders described her as nervous, acutely aware that while she sat under the bright lights of the studio, the eyes of the person who took her mother were likely fixed on the screen. It is a haunting reality, a daughter forced to perform for the very monster who silenced her mother's heart. Behind the scenes, the investigation remains focused on the immaculate condition of the home, a detail Brian Entin has highlighted as both a clue and a curse. Aside from the blood trail at the door, the interior of Nancy's house remained disturbingly undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle in the kitchen, where they had played board games just hours before the disappearance. This lack of chaos suggests a terrifyingly controlled abduction, one where the suspect knew exactly how to navigate the home's layout without knocking over a single chair. The silence was briefly shattered by a new ransom note received by media outlets. Unlike the earlier demands for cryptocurrency in exchange for Nancy's safe return, this message was chillingly final. It claimed to know the location of Nancy's remains and demanded 1 Bitcoin for the coordinates. This shift confirmed the darkest fears of the FBI. The leverage of a live hostage had likely vanished weeks ago, replaced by a cold-blooded attempt to extract one last payout from a tragedy. As Savannah Guthrie speaks to the world once more, her presence serves as a living reminder of the human cost of procedural missteps. The community in the Catalina foothills, once defined by luxury, now stands as a landscape of locked gates and wary neighbors, all looking toward the desert and wondering if the silence will ever truly be broken. The case of Nancy Guthrie remains one of the most baffling and heartbreaking mysteries of the modern era. It is a story written in the gaps of technology, in the 41 minutes of darkness between a camera's death and a heart's final sink. As the forensic laboratories continue the painstaking work of DNA deconvolution, trying to pull a name out of the biological chaos, we are left to confront the chilling reality of how easily a sanctuary can be breached. We are left with the haunting image of a man in a Walmart hiker pack, a predator who moved with clinical precision through the desert night, and a department whose initial rush to judgment may have allowed him to vanish into the border shadows. The search for Nancy is no longer just about a person. It is about the accountability of those who serve and the limits of the technology we trust to keep us safe. As the Tucson sun sets over the Catalina foothills, casting long, jagged shadows across the saguaros, we have to ask, in a world where every pulse can be tracked and every movement recorded, how did a mother, a grandmother, and a friend disappear without a trace? Is the truth buried in the DNA software of a lab, or is it hidden in the silence of someone who is watching this right now? Justice for Nancy Guthrie is still waiting, and until that name is matched to the DNA, the desert will keep its secrets. Thank you for following this deep dive into the Nancy Guthrie case on True Crime Threads. If you want to stay updated as the DNA results come in and the search for the suspect in the hiker pack continues, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a breaking update. What do you believe is the most critical piece of evidence still missing from this investigation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps keep these cases in the spotlight. Share this video to ensure Nancy's story isn't forgotten.